Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Sydney Morgan. I have a new case for you guys today. Today we're going to be covering the case of Edmund Kemper, aka the co-ed killer. In my opinion, I don't think that he should be known as the co-ed killer because that's like the last part of this case that comes to my mind when I think of Edmund Kemper. So whatever, we'll go with it, the co-ed killer. Edmund Kemper III was born on December 18th, 1948 in Burbank, California to his mother, whose name was Claire Nell. I think that's how you pronounce it. I have no idea. And his father, who was also Edmund Kemper. Now this crazy SOB, he displayed psychopathic tendencies and crap like that at a really early age. But if you go down the checklist of everything that serial killers have, like trait-wise, he pretty much checks every single box. This guy is sick. And just like most serial killers, he started out his torturing on small animals when he was a child. But before we get into the crazy sick shit that this guy did, we're going to go ahead and go back and look a little bit more into his childhood. Edmund was pretty much creepy from the time that he was a child. He had two older sisters, and even they were creeped out by him. And his mother even looked at him and was like, yeah, there's something wrong with you. So that's not a good start off to life, you know? He would actually play like really weird games with his sisters. He would make them tie him down to a chair, and then he would play games like electric chair or gas chamber, where he would pretend like he was in an electric chair tied down at the wrist to a chair, and he would pretend like he was being electrocuted until he died, completely creeping out his sisters. And his mother, Claire Nell, really didn't like any of this either. She always thought that there was something not quite right about her son. So you could kind of look at this as like being a good parent or being a bad parent, but she would actually force him to sleep in the basement in fear that he would like molest his sisters or something. So she forced him to sleep in the cold basement. Now, something about his mother was actually like batshit crazy. Yeah, she was an interesting woman. She was an alcoholic for one, and she was mean. She verbally abused him. She clearly treated him like shit. And the psychologists would even say, I have never heard somebody hate their mother as much as this man hated his mother. She was terrible to him. She would get drunk and go on like rampages, and plus making him sleep in the basement. That's just really rude. It's cold down there. He doesn't want to be down there. But when Ed was a child, his parents actually separated because his father, he hated Claire Nell as well. He could not stand Claire Nell. He said that he would rather be back in World War II getting tortured than to stay with Claire Nell. Which, I mean, that kind of says a lot. So his parents divorce. His dad actually moves away, and he stays living with his mother and his two sisters. At the age of 13, Edmund decided that like he wanted to go find his dad. He wanted to go stay with his dad and get the hell away from his mother, who was an alcoholic psychopath. So he goes on the hunt for his father. He finds his father, and his father had a brand new life. He had a new wife. He had his stepson. The wife had the kid, whatever. He had a brand new life, and he really just didn't want like anything to do with Edmund. So Edmund went back to live with his mother. And when he was 14, she kind of decided that she didn't want him or want to put up with him anymore, so she sent him to live with his grandparents. And his grandparents lived on a 17-acre farm in North Fork, California. But unfortunately, he really didn't like his grandmother either, because his grandmother acted just like his mom. She was mean. She was rotten. He didn't like it. And this is where he started to have like a complete hatred toward women, I think. In my opinion, he started hating women because his mom and his grandma were complete bitches. By the age of 15, Edmund was huge. Huge kid. He was 6'4" by the time he was 15. On August 27th, 1964, his grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, and she wrote children's books, so she's putting her finishing touches on this children's book. And Edmund decided to go get a rifle and go to the kitchen, put the gun to her head, and he shot her. And just to make sure that she was dead, he shot her again. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and waited for his grandfather to get home from the grocery store so that he could shoot him too. So his grandfather comes home and he shoots his grandfather as well. So now he's sitting there at the kitchen table looking at both of these bodies of his grandparents who he just killed. And he's trying to think of what he should do. So he decides to call his mother. I wouldn't call her. I feel like she's probably not going to be the best person to give advice to you at this point, but whatever. So he calls her and she starts in on him. She's like, "You're stupid. Why would you do that? You're so ignorant. Just wait there and call the cops." So he actually sat there, picked up the phone, dialed the number to the police. He called the cops on himself and he sat there. He didn't try to run. He didn't go anywhere. He just sat there and waited for the police to show up. So the police show up and he's telling the cops exactly what he did. "Hey, here's the bodies. This is what I did." And when the police asked why he did it, he said, "I wanted to know what it felt like to kill them." So clearly there's something wrong in his head. Like, usually that's not like a natural thought that people have. I wonder what it feels like to kill somebody. I mean, we all may think it when we're mad at someone. I don't know, but we don't do it. He did it. He killed them. He killed them. So Edmund was arrested and diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and he was sent to the state hospital for the criminally insane. And once he was there, this man was a genius. Absolute genius. 15-year-old Edmund Kemper, he befriended his psychologist. He gained the trust of all the staff, his doctors, and the other inmates. He was the perfect inmate. He helped organize events, and he really went out of his way to seem like the most perfect inmate that possibly could be there. And while he was in there, they actually gave him an IQ test where he scored over a 140. Some reports say it was 140, some reports say that it was 145, whatever. That's like holy shit level. He's very smart. So while he's in there, he plays everyone. He makes all these doctors and the guards and the other inmates think that he is actually being rehabilitated. Which, I mean, if you're a true crime fan, which I know you are, you're here, that doesn't happen very often. I feel like once you're so sick in the head that you kill people, family members at that, because you just want to know what it feels like, you're not going to be rehabilitated. There's probably nothing that anybody can do to cure your crazy ass. But he convinces everybody that he is on the right path. He's so much better now. December 18th, 1969, only serving 5 years in this institute for criminally insane, for murdering his grandparents, they release him. They said that he is the perfect inmate and he is no longer in any way a danger to society. Lucky guy, that doesn't ever happen. They don't usually just release people that are labeled criminally insane. So he gets released, and what better place to release him than to his mother's house, where that's the person that caused most of his trauma, because she's a crazy alcoholic who like verbally abuses him, telling him he's stupid and he's worthless. And so that's exactly where he should go, right? Because that's what they thought. They were like, yeah, go ahead. Have fun, 21-year-old murderer. You're definitely rehabilitated, so go back with the psycho bitch that raised you. That'll play out really good. And on top of that, he didn't only just get released early. He got them to completely seal his juvenile records. So, being a murderer was completely off his record now. If he wanted to go try to get a job, nobody would be able to see it. He'd be perfectly fine expunged record, just looking fucking squeaky clean and beautiful. So he goes back to Santa Cruz, and he moves in with his mother, and things are going all right. So he gets a job for the state of California Division of Transportation, but there he unfortunately got into an accident where he got hurt, and because of that he was compensated with like a bunch of money. I think it was like $15,000, and back in '69 that was a lot more than what it is today. So today we might look at it like 15,000 is not that much, but it was a good bit back then. But with all this downtime, Edmund starts just driving up and down the highways. He starts driving up and down the highways, and he's observing female hitchhikers. So he starts picking up female hitchhikers, and later he'd say that he picked up probably about 150 female hitchhikers, and he called it practice for what he was going to do. Eventually he starts picking up these hitchhikers at the college that his mother works at. So he's picking up these co-ed students, taking them wherever they want to go, but he's doing it so that he can learn their behaviors and learn how to act to gain their trust, like an absolute creeper. That thank God we have like Uber and Lyft now. They may not always be safe. There's been a few situations where that's gone sour too, but at least it's not hitchhiking. At least you have documentation in your phone of who you're going with. Back then they didn't have it. They just jumped in the car with serial killers and hoped for the best. And Edmund actually wanted to be a police officer. Now in his adulthood, he is ginormous. He is about 6'9" and like over 300 pounds. Big dude. But people would actually say that he seems like a complete gentle giant. And I've heard of people doing this where they use, the big scary guys will use a very soft, mellow voice to try to make themselves seem a lot more innocent and harmless. And that's what he did. He actually wanted to be a police officer, and he went through his trying to get into the police academy, and they actually told him no because of his size, which makes absolutely no sense. Like, I would, if I was hiring people, I would take him. He was big and scary. Yes, you may be a police officer on my force if you're 6'9" and 300 pounds, but they did not. He started going to the local bar where it was known that police officers and lawyers and, you know, all the law enforcement people would hang out. So he's going there and acting like he's just the nicest, big, sweetest teddy bear that he possibly could to, like, earn the trust of these police officers. Looking back on what he does in the future, police officers would say that they think that he was, like, trying to creep his way in there to get intel by hanging out at this bar. But before I start telling you about this crazy, ginormous, murderous teddy bear's crimes, I wanted to take time to go ahead and let you guys know that I'm a small business owner, and if you're watching this today, I am offering 10% off if you use the code YouTube for my handmade soy wax melts. I just dropped my fall scents. The link for my shop will be below in the description, so make sure you go check it out. Anyways, so on May 7th, 1972, Ed is around where his mother works at the university. He sees two co-ed girls who he would later say actually reminded him of his mother. That'll come into play later. Their names were Marianne and Anita. Ed picks these girls up, and he's driving them to the other state college when all of a sudden he decided to pull off into a little deserted area, and he pulled his gun from underneath of his seat. That's when he put Anita in the trunk of his car. Once Anita was in the trunk, he turned to Marianne. Now, he handcuffed Marianne, and he put a plastic bag over her head and tried to strangle her. But she bit a hole through that plastic bag, and all that did was piss this man off. So this giant murderous teddy bear decided to pull his knife out and start stabbing her repeatedly. And then he slit her throat. So after he kills Marianne, he pulls Anita out of the trunk and he began to stab her. She tried to scream and fight him off, but that didn't work, and he killed her. Then he drove around with the bodies in the car for a while. He took them back to his apartment where he decapitated both of them and removed their hands. I think a lot of times killers do that because they think that that's the way to take away their identification. And in the mix of that, he abused their bodies sexually. Once he did everything that he wanted to do to these girls' bodies, he dumped Marianne's head and body into a nearby ravine, but unfortunately neither Anita's head or body has ever been found. And on September 14th, 1972, he drove by a bus stop. And at that bus stop, there was a girl named Akio. She was a 15-year-old girl, and she was into ballet. She went to that bus stop because she was trying to get to her ballet class, and she actually missed the bus. She was very adamant about being there and not being late, and she really enjoyed dance. So Creepy Ed drove by and offered her a ride, and even though she knew she shouldn't do it, she really just wanted to get to her dance class. So she went ahead and took that risk and got into his vehicle. But this girl, young, she was not stupid. She realized that he was completely driving in the wrong direction. So she kind of started to panic. Ed pulls his gun, and he convinces this 15-year-old girl that he's actually going to use the gun on himself. So he's trying to do what typical murderers do. He's trying to put her at ease. Like, if you do what I say, you won't die. I'll kill myself, but you won't die. Nothing's going to happen to you if you just listen to me and do exactly as I say. Which, 9 times out of 10, that turns out to be completely wrong. And unfortunately, this time, it did as well. Ed pulled off the main road, and he grabbed the girl, taped her mouth shut, and tried to suffocate her by shoving his thumbs in her nose. But he didn't do a good enough job because she ended up waking up, so he used her scarf to strangle her. Then he puts her lifeless body into the trunk of his car, and then he goes to the bar, the cop bar, and he's trying to scope out the cops and chit chat, and he's just like this friendly dude with all these cops. He's hoping that these cops will open up and say if they have any information on the previous cases, the other 2 co-eds he killed, while he has this dead body of this poor girl in the trunk of his car parked right outside. So once he leaves this cop bar, he goes back to his apartment and he brings her inside, and he also violates her sexually after she's already dead. He decapitates his victim, cuts her hands off, and he disposes of all separate parts in different areas, and unfortunately only a few of those remains have ever even been found. After Ed kills these girls, he actually waits 4 months until he goes back out again and picks another victim to kill. This victim's name was Cindy, and he picked Cindy up. He drove her to close to where she wanted to go. He put her in the trunk, and as soon as she got into the trunk, Ed shot her in the head because he's a dick. The bullet lodged in her skull. He had actually just moved back in with his mother, Claire now. So Ed kills Cindy, and he takes her back to the house where his mother lives, and he keeps her in the trunk all night. Ed waits for his mother to leave for work before bringing Cindy's body into the house, and he puts her in the bathtub. Once she's in the bathtub, he decapitates her, and he sexually violates her body because he's a gross son of a bitch. Then he takes the time out to remove the bullet that is lodged in her skull. He takes that out. I'm assuming so it's that they can't trace the bullet back to the gun that he had recently purchased, but I'm not sure. Whatever happened, happened. After she's in the bathtub, he cuts her head off, and he sexually violates her. Then he goes on to bury Cindy's head in his mother's backyard. He takes the rest of the body parts, he puts them in plastic bags, and he actually throws them off a cliff. But once he threw these body parts off the cliff, he was worried because they found them within 24 hours. So he starts freaking out in his own head, and he actually stops killing and doing all that crazy, creepy shit for like a month or so before he goes back out and does it again. On February 5th, 1973, about a month after his last killing of Cindy, he gets into an argument with his mother, and he storms out of the house. He gets in his car and he goes off to pick up another hitchhiker. This is when he picked up a hitchhiker named Rosalind. And he starts chatting her up, talking to her while they're driving, and then he finds another woman who needs picked up, and her name was Alice. At this point, Ed, evolved. Usually he stops and pulls off on the side of the road where nobody can see them, and then he commits his murders. This time, with Rosalind in the passenger seat and Alice in the back seat, he doesn't even stop his car. He decides to slow down, points his gun at Rosalind, and just point blank shoots her in the head. Then after that, Alice, I could assume that she's freaking out in the back seat. He turns and shoots her in the back seat multiple times, but she does not die. Once he realizes that she didn't die, turns around and he shoots her point blank in the head. Then he pulls off on a cul-de-sac and he puts both of the bodies into the trunk of his car. So now Ed has 2 dead bodies in the trunk of his car. He goes back to his mother's house, and once he gets inside, he claims that he forgot to get cigarettes. So he almost immediately leaves. He goes out to the car that's parked in the front of the house, and he would later say that he was actually confused how nobody caught him. He would say in interviews that he was confused how all his mother, all his neighbors, all anybody had to do was look out the blinds and see him in the trunk of his car as he beheaded both of these girls. But nobody caught him. Nobody saw him out there doing some crazy shit in the trunk of his car, cutting off these girls' heads. And once again, he waits for his mother to leave for work, and he brings the bodies into his mother's house where he sexually assaults them. After he's done doing that, he goes and disposes the bodies in one place and then gets rid of the heads in another. So another month goes by, and Ed is restless this night. He's laying in bed, but he can't go to sleep. So in the very early morning hours of the day, he grabs a hammer and a knife and he goes into his mother's bedroom. The mother that he despises. The mother that I'm pretty sure, always wanted to murder. He goes into her bedroom and he strikes her once on the head really hard with the hammer. And then he takes out the knife and he cuts her throat. Chops her head off. Cuts her tongue out. And then rips out her vocal cords. He takes the tongue and the vocal cords and he puts them into the garbage disposal, thinking that maybe because this is the woman who has verbally abused him his whole life, he's like getting his revenge on the tongue and the vocal cords. He's gonna chop them up in the disposal. Well, it doesn't work. It didn't chew it up very good. And then he does the unspeakable. Like how I said earlier that I have no idea how he's remembered as the co-ed killer. That's the last thing that I would associate him with, because he takes his mother's severed head with no tongue in it and he assaults his mother's head sexually. And after he's done doing that, he hangs her head and he throws darts at it. He uses her head as a dartboard. Then he hides his mother's body in the closet. And he goes and calls his mother's best friend, Sarah, and asks her if she wants to come over for dinner. So once his mother's friend, Sarah, shows up, he doesn't waste any time. He tries to strangle her. And when that doesn't work using his hands, he takes the scarf of the ballet dancer that he had previously killed. He took that scarf and he used that to strangle his mother's friend as well. and he succeeds killing Sarah, and then he also sexually abuses her corpse. After this, he steals Sarah's car, so he decides that he needs to leave town. He gets in his mother's friend's car, and he leaves. He gets about 18 hours out of town. Then he decides that he's going to ditch her car at a gas station. Once he ditches her car at the gas station, he picks up a rental car. And I think at this point he realized, like, I did what I wanted to do. My mother was my bully of my whole life. I killed her. I'm done. I don't want to kill anymore. So he calls the Santa Cruz Police Department, and he starts talking to these cops that know him. They know him. They've known him for a long time. He's Friendly Ed. He's the big, crazy big giant teddy bear that they know from the bar. He starts confessing on the phone that he's murdered all these people, and nobody believed him. No one believed him. It actually took several phone calls to convince them that he was the murderer. Once he convinces these cops that he is the murderer, they come to Colorado, where he ended up being. So they arrest him. They take him back to Santa Cruz, they put him in interrogation, and they're talking to him, and he's revealing all kinds of things that, like, most people don't know about these murders. So they start to realize that he's really the killer. He is really the killer that they've been looking for. This is the guy. But at the same time, there were like 3 other serial killers who were on the loose in Santa Cruz at that time. That's why Santa Cruz is known as the murder capital of the world, because you had 3 other murderers on their murder spree at that time. So once he got back to Santa Cruz and he started confessing, Ed actually took the police to the sites where he had dumped some of the bodies that they had not yet found. And with the amount of murders that he's confessed to and the crazy amounts of details to these murders, his defender, his lawyer, had no idea what to do. Like, clearly you're guilty. You've confessed to it. You're done. All there was to do to defend this man was to declare that he was just insane. Of course, they go with the insanity plea. Then there was a doctor that came in and pretty much just demolished his insanity plea. This doctor said that he was not insane, that he was obsessed with sex and violence, and that all he wanted was attention. During his trial, Ed decided to grab a pen and stab it into his wrist and drag it on up, and he tried to attempt suicide to make it look like he was more insane. And during his trial, he did not have one single character witness. He didn't have friends, family, his sisters, nobody stepped forward to say that this man was anything other than a freaking murderer. They were all afraid of him. The jury only deliberated for 5 hours before they came back, and he was found guilty of all murder charges. After this, he was sentenced to life in prison. In 1973, Ed was sentenced to life in prison. And to this day, he takes pride in being the genius serial killer who wouldn't have gotten caught if it weren't for his own confession. To this day, he is still in prison. He likes to do interviews. There are quite a few out there. So this is actually where Ed's story ends. He's a crazy necrophiliac serial killer who ended up in prison for life. The fact that he was able to convince everybody within 5 years of murdering his grandparents that he was perfectly sane and was no threat to society is what blows my mind. That's crazy. But if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm always uploading new true crime stories. Thank you guys for joining me. Make sure you comment and let me know what you guys think. If you like how I deliver the stories, if you have any case suggestions, go ahead and comment them below, and I will see you next time.